Thank you for coming, everyone. I know that I'm competing with very important people on campus today, but I'm glad that you guys got here today. We're going to open up this. It's going to be a discussion on ethics. It's not going to be me standing up here telling you what ethics is. I expect everybody to, involve themselves with this, and this is just the opening dialogue. We're going to continue to do this. We want to do this once a month and put the pieces of the puzzles together for ethics. Basic definition of ethics, I pulled it out of the dictionary. It says moral principles that governs a person or a group's behavior. I found this Rosetta looking thing that I found really interesting, and it discusses or looks at what's behind ethical reasoning. As you can see, and we'll go into each of these in more detail: formal rules, goals, organization, cultures, values, and ethics. And if you put all those together, you'll come up with what we consider ethical reasoning. Let's first discuss formal rules. Everybody knows what they are. It's the law that can be characterized as society's voice. A regulation is like a law, but it's different because of the source of it. For example, you may have a regulation in place that is not from a law system. For example, a law comes from the Congress. All right, a regulation may come from, say, a governing body type of thing. And policies are on the local level. For example, employees' policies, et cetera, like that. Organizational culture, you see there's three of those: societal norms, industrial standards, organizational norms. Societal norms are just what conduct that is normally acceptable, socially acceptable, socially unacceptable, and you often hear that. That's not socially acceptable, that is, et cetera, like that. Industry standards, it's informal, and it defines what an industry is allowed to do. For example, welders have their own standards of what's allowed, what's not allowed, what they have to wear, whether welding, et cetera, like that. And then organizational norms is what's allowed. For example, Brumo Circle of Excellence, we have a dress code that we follow, all right? That is considered for us organizational, the Brumo Circle, that's our norms, what our dress code is allowed to be. Goals and objectives, you can see those also. Values and ethics, you have three different levels: societal, organizational, and self. Societal is the whole, for example, United States. Organizational, here the school, and then your own personal values. I'd like to discuss, I used, you'll see that all this material that I got from Navarre and Associates. It was on the website, and it's allowed for non-commercial use, which educational is considered non-commercial. So I got a couple of case studies, and what I'd like to do is discuss the case study or tell you what the case study is about, have you come up with what you guys think is ethical. The first one is Iceberg Heating, Ventilation, and Air Conditioning. It's a multinational manufacturer of military, commercial, and residential heating and air conditioning equipment. Their operations includes a franchise arrangement where local high-vac contractors can be licensed to sell and service the Iceberg commercial and residential lines. There's a problem that has experience with several franchisees. Service techs go out on service calls. They identify the problem. If the problem is not covered by the warranty, they sometimes offer the customer a, quote, special arrangement. And the example is a service tech goes to a customer's residence and discovers that a particular part is damaged. Replacing the part will cost $300 for parts and $200 for labor. They then tell the customer and offer them an alternative. They offer to sell the customer the part for $300. That price is fixed. And then arrange for a private contractor to do the labor for $100 less than the quote. If you remember, the quote was for $200, so they cut the price in half. The customer agrees, and that evening, after working hours, the service tech returns and does the installation himself, making himself $100 and deriving the franchisee and Iceberg of their respective shares of $200, but saving the customers $100. So the first question I have, is it legal?
Probably. I would think so. Because
Right.
they sold them apart.
All right, is it ethical? What do you think? But you're saving the customer $100. What's unethical about not saving $100?
Not following the company regulations, and if they put those regulations, you're supposed to follow them. So it's kind of like you're disrespecting the iceberg company.
I agree it is unethical, and it doesn't even have to be in the rules that says that you can't do that, but I think it is, unethical in that, the company is expecting you as their employee to, do this at this cost, and to me, I consider that would be unethical. Any other? Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this, let's take it to the next time they need service. Okay, so now he offers me this deal and I say, yeah, and I take advantage of it because it's $100. And yeah, it's unethical for the guy to do it. It's not necessarily unethical for me to do it. I'm a customer and I can do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
The next time I need service, if I call the guy directly and skip iceberg heating and air conditioning and say I need you to come out and do X after hours, is that then ethical?
Is it ethical for the customer to make that call? Is that the question? Or is the question, is it ethical for the service tech to do the work? Both.
I think a very good case can be made that the customer can call whoever he wants. But now, my question, I guess, is, does the fact that I have a relationship with this guy because of iceberg mean that any further contact carries with it that unethical behavior of the person?
See, I see what he's definitely saying right there, because, I mean,
Yeah,
I had a guy put in my cable, all right, and, well, part of it was, oh yeah, put my name in for good service, and they get a little bit of a bump. Well, is that necessarily, it's kind of a similar type thing where you're building that relationship with that person.
Right, and my example would be when we bought our house 14 years ago. We had the tile guys install the tile, all through Home Depot. And then during the course of the conversation, we paid for the Home Depot price the first time they came, everything was fine. And then after that, as we were leaving, my wife said, do you ever do stuff on your own? And the guy said, yes, and they gave us a call. So the next time we needed tile, we didn't buy it from Home Depot, we bought it from some tile store, and we called these guys to install. Now, I think that was fine because we consummated the relationship and completed the relationship the first time, and the second time was totally independent. Whereas in this example, if I take the guy up on his $100 thing, he comes back at 9 o'clock at night and does it. The next time I call him, a case could be made that that's kind of the fruit of a poisoned relationship already.
Well, and I think that and it's the way I kind of read that was the customer didn't know that it was going to be the same person coming back. So I kind of feel like the customer was not unethical. I think that if the customer had known it was going to be the same person, then they would be in the area of unethical themselves, but they didn't know, so it was okay then.
The other thing about this example is that $300 for the part. Now, if a company is going to sell you a part for $300, they're already making profit off that part. So essentially, yes, they might be costing the company some money on the labor cost, which is probably a higher margin when it comes to how much money they're going to get, because it's ridiculous how much labor costs, but compared to what they're actually getting paid. So, and then you have to kind of investigate into what the organizational structure is for how much a service tech is getting paid at the same time for that same job. Now, is that ethical on Iceberg's part for how much they're paying and how much they're profiting off of the labor costs and the price of doing business. Because so then it could be one of those things where the service tech is being unethical in this situation, but at the same time, is Iceberg Heating and Air Conditioning being ethical in their business practices? So again, fruit of a poison relationship, and
to go back to my tile example, we paid Home Depot an extra $2 a square foot to have it put in on the back. Home Depot gave none of that to the installers. We're actually doing it, so.
And see that, and that is obviously that is a topic of conversation that we can hold at a different time on, you know, the difference between what a business charges and what a business pays. You know, where does it become unethical for them to, you know, like you said, charge extra for the putting it in a diagonal when there's no extra cost associated with it as far as the laborer is concerned.
Yeah, and it's interesting, because I think as we go through this, we'll probably, I'm not trying to preview, but we'll probably find that taking in a vacuum, you come up with one answer, but if you expand that, you come up with a myriad of different answers depending upon who you are. And so when you go back to your original slide of the three types of ethics, really the foundational one is the bottom one, the self-ethic.
Right.
That's the one that's really
And that's one of the things that I wanted to bring up is that I consider myself old school in the fact that a man only has his name. And what does that mean? To me, that means that if I say I'm going to do something and I shake your hand, that should be, you know, that's me, you know, and I'm going to do it. And we'll get into that later on in a different scenario. But that's all you really have in life, and that is, you know, the self-ethics. What are you going to do? And when I say that, I mean, what are you going to do when nobody else is looking? You know, when nobody else is there, nobody else is looking, you know, you're in a position that, for example, I'm in security position, all right? I have keys to almost 90% of the rooms on campus, all right? And I walk around, and third shift does it also. They walk around after everybody's gone. And they go through and they check and make sure that the lights are turned out and, you know, et cetera, like that. Well, you come in there and you see a candy bar laying on the desk and you're hungry. What are you going to do? That's when you get down to what are your ethics. You know, are you going to leave that candy bar there, or are you going to steal it? All right? Or there's...
is that why we didn't have any candies left in our car all the other day?
That's probably what it was.
Sounds like Debbie Guy's little candy dish is empty all the time.
I know, right?
No, Debbie Guy's candy dish is not empty because of me. But I mean, seriously, that's the type of things that we're that we want to talk about is, you know, and taking this the next step. You know, if you're working for a company and, you know, the company expects you to be working for them, not working for yourself. So that's one scenario. Let's do another scenario.
Are we still doing heating and air conditioning, or are we doing something?
What would you like to do? All right, let's.
The heat part, something like that. It's always- I can't believe you're not shooting. I'm freezing. I got COVID.
Let's talk about Brenton Mills. Brenton Mills went bankrupt. Creditors were demanding repayment on total obligations exceeded the small company's assets by nearly $1 million. The privately held corporation and its sole owner faced the biggest crisis in the 12-year history. At best, the assets of the company would make good on 30 to 35% of the total debt. As a corporation, Brenton Mills had an option of liquidating its assets and paying its creditors whatever it could based on legal formula. But the owner was reluctant to do that. To understand the dilemma he faced, the forces that shaped his thinking, you need a little history. This gentleman that was the sole owner was born in 1910 in New York City, the first child of a recent immigrant from Eastern Europe. At the age of 3, his parents took him back to the, quote, old country for what turned out to be an extended visit. Shortly after their arrival, World War I began, and it was 9 years before they could escape the little village and return to America. The family returned. He enrolled in public school. He completed almost 8 years' worth of schooling by the time the Great Depression hit, and he, like thousands, left to seek work. He found a sales position. His sales skills was good, and he did well. His father was working in a small factory that knit quality women's apparel, sweaters, scarves. 10 years later, The depression over, he pooled resources with his father, and they bought the factory, Brenton Mills. His father ran the production end. He was a salesman. The war created a unique opportunity because the largest mill were converting to wartime products. Brenton was too small to win government contracts, but found themselves a niche market with little competition. During the war, there was a demand for quality women's wear through upscale department stores and specialty shops. Brenton Mills prospered. In 1943, his father died. By the end of the war, he was prosperous. He moved to the suburbs and was living a good life. Let's see. He created the fashion sensation of the 1949 season, the Fascinator, a combination scarf and hat that caught the imagination of the traditional clientele as well as the mass market. It became all the rage. The full capacity mill was dedicated to producing these fascinators, but it was not enough to keep up with demand. Stores were clamoring for more and more. They were willing to pay top dollar to keep their shelves full and customers happy. Let's see. He found a compelling sales approach. He knew the Fascinator had another season of solid sales left in it. Why not guarantee those sales to the stores, eliminate the risk, sell the full capacity of Brenton Mills on consignment? When the stores didn't sell, he'd promised to buy back, or what the stores didn't sell, he'd promised to buy back at season end. The buyers were right. Fascinator sales were pitiful. Less than 25% of the production now found its way into customers' hands, and much of that was at deeply discounted prices. The stores lined up for refunds. Brenton Mills made good on the promise until the money ran out. He consulted with his attorneys. They advised that Brenton Mills declare bankruptcy and distribute the resources of the mills as prescribed by law, estimating that each of the creditors was likely to receive no more than 30 to 35 cents on the dollar. His personal assets would be untouched, and he would be well positioned to start a new business venture if he chose. Of course, he could always retire and live comfortably. He disregarded their advice. In his mind, he had made a promise. He had sold his products to reluctant buyers by offering his personal assurance, his word, and that if the product did not sell, Brenton Mills would refund their money. But he was Brenton Mills. They had agreed to buy his product because they had trusted him to keep his end of the bargain. Rather than hide behind the protection afforded by bankruptcy law, he chose to dissolve his personal fortune. He liquidated all of his investments, sold his house, his car, his yacht, his wife's jewelry, furs, and their small collection of works of art. He was able to return over 95 cents on the dollar to his surprised and grateful creditors. He was willing to start over. He found a job, began a more modest life. He would be back where he'd started, but his honor was intact. He made good on his job. But there's a postscript to this story. In distribution of all of his assets to Brenton Mill creditors, he ignored one of his creditors. Anybody want to guess who it was? The IRS. Among his now liquidated accounts was a set-aside intended to pay his corporate income tax. 2 months after he thought he had settled his affairs, the IRS notified them he was in arrears for more than $250,000, and he explained that he had nothing left that was unmoved, but they had promised to be patient. They would take 50% of all of his pre-tax income redress his obligations plus interest and penalties until the debt was settled. He lived on the edge of poverty for the next 12 years. In 1963, he was laid by a crippling stroke. And with his wife, who suffered from multiple sclerosis, he had no choice but to accept being placed in welfare and Medicare until his death in 1972. His wife survived in that home until 1988. Any comments?
Gotta pay Uncle Sugar first.
Well, yeah, that's the moral of the story. But what about doing the actual? Oh, see, you messed it all up now. What about? Would he have been ethical to liquidate under the bankruptcy laws? I mean, obviously he felt it wasn't, and he felt like his word was all that he had, and he had to obligate or make good on his obligations. But would it have been ethical for him to do that? I mean, people do it all the time.
I mean, I think it would have been ethical because he was following the prescribed procedures and all those stuff. However, you know, you go back to your slide with the 3 cons. You know, he obviously met the top 2, but it wouldn't have met his, you know, the other one, the one with the self-ethics and the other. Yeah, it certainly would have met societal, it would have met organizational, but it didn't meet himself. So,
Exactly.
And it's interesting, I mean, you know, that's a great case study because I think the same thing happened to Eddie Rickenbacker in the 20s. He was trying to save a company and he accepted a $250,000 loan. The company went under and he spent the next 30 years paying the loan. You know, because that was his word that secured the loan. So I think
Yeah.
just because it's right and it's legal and ethical doesn't mean it's right or ethical for the individual.
And that's why I picked that particular case study, because obviously it was legal for him to do that. Obviously, a lot of people would feel like it was ethical for him to do that, but he didn't feel like it was because of his beliefs in that it was his word that he had said that he would make good on making the money back.
Yeah, it's interesting though, because I think it points out that you're always able to hold yourself to a higher standard, but you can't hold yourself to a lower standard in society allows. But yeah, I'll tell you, IRS will, and the IRS penalties are 100%. If you owe them $100, you would now have to pay them $100 plus $100 penalty.
And I had a personal case myself with the IRS. And I don't want to sound like I'm putting myself up, but I am. I'm an ethical man. And what happened was my tax bracket changed considerably. Let's be honest, my 2 kids left home and moved out on their own. And so I had been paying I was claiming single and 0. And then when I filed my taxes, I was down to married and 2. And I still owed them money. I'm like, this is not right. There's just something wrong with this system. When I claim single and 0 all year long, my wife claims single and 0 all year long on the money she makes, I claim it on the money I make. And at the end of the year, when we file married and 2, we still owe them money. And I owed them $1,200. And I didn't pay them. I was mad. I was dumb, but I was mad. And because I didn't pay him that year, for the next 5 years, I didn't even file taxes because I knew I still owed him that money from the first time. Then I realized, as has been pointed out, the IRS will get their money. And I'm thinking to myself, they're going to come, they're going to take my house, they're going to take everything I own. Meanwhile, I'm thinking, there's these corporations out there that owe them 3 times as much money as I owe them, but they're going to get away with it, but they're going to come get me, I guarantee you. It's just the way I think. So I made it right with the IRS. I went in, did all the paperwork, and I owed them bunches of money. And I spent the next many, many years paying extra money to them every month and et cetera like that. Got them all paid off. My wife says, why don't you file for an exemption? I'm like, no, I owe them this money. I'm going to pay my debt. And I paid it all off, and now I make sure that I always claim more money. Oh, no. I always make sure that I send them more money than what they think they're supposed to get. So I take like $50 payday from my paychecks and send it in. Of course, then I get letters from the IRS saying, you have too much deducted, you need to change it. And I'm like, no, I'm not changing it. Yeah. Well, and the thing is they're getting, basically what the IRS is getting from me is a interest-free loan. You know, I'm not getting any interest when they send the money back to me, but that's beside the point. All right, let me see, we got another one here. I think the last one we'll talk about is the Bonanza Wetlands Group. Sub-Saharan Africa facing challenges. There are 5 SEs, which is state environmentalist employed by the WG, which is the wetlands group. Typically, they visit a farm and assess a risk. For example, the SEs examine sites, prescribe protections for any nearby wetlands from flooding, erosions, contaminations, which is fertilizer runoff, or any other harm that could result from expanding farming operations. So they have 5 SEs employed by the wetlands group. They visit the farm. If risks are noted, the wetlands groups withhold permission to expand the cultivation until appropriate steps are taken. The farmer then has to hire an environmental engineer to design a series of canals, dams, ditches, retention ponds, etc., to protect the wetlands. The farmer pays the WG for the implementation, and then the SEs examines the work and certifies it meets the wetlands groups. All right. Two missions are accomplished by doing this. We think this is all good, right? Environmental protection and job creation. There's one problem. There are very few environmental engineers. In fact, the best of the lot are the 5 SEs employed by the WG. Given the shortage of resources, the SEs, which go in and say, you've got to have this built, are the ones that are being hired to develop the plans and build it. The SEs are in honorable groups that sought recommendations. SEs' positions are, they feel like they're being ethical because there are no other resources. Nobody else can do it like they can. They need to be proficient in design exercises, and the design exercises keep them sharp. They need to keep the relationship with the agricultural community current. There'll be, they feel like they're doing something wrong, but they're not sure what it is. Any comments on that? Yes, sir.
It sounds like, I mean, it could be seen as unethical because if they're doing the assessment and then they're also going to be profiting from doing the work, it could be seen as unethical just because there's a bias there. It's kind of similar, I was thinking about it, it's kind of similar to if you're a person who doesn't know anything about cars and you bring your car into the place to do your oil change and they say, hey, you need power steering fluid every 60,000 miles or whatnot, but you don't have any idea what's going on with your car because you don't know cars, at least not the ins and outs of them, so they're going to upsell you. Now, it's kind of similar because you know they're trying to upsell you, but at the same time, if there really is an issue, you don't want to be stuck stranded with your car. So going back to the example, I felt like there's a bias there, but at the same time, how can you prevent it other than trying to get an outside opinion or a secondary opinion on what needs to be done? I mean, that would be the only thing that I would say would be a little bit different. I mean, because of the fact that you know that the people doing the assessment are going to benefit straight from it. It's kind of like when you're trying to sell your house and you get an appraisal done. Appraisal's done by a third party because they have no interest in the sale other than that they're going to get paid to do the appraisal. So I think eliminating bias is a big thing. I don't know if it's necessarily unethical unless the group is actually doing stuff to say is actually basically like those basically doing some upselling like the oil change places can do sometimes.
Well, I think it's a lot like the stock market. People go in and the people that rate the stocks, who they get paid by? The people that own the stocks. The companies that own the stock. It makes me wonder if, where do you draw the line with that kind of stuff? I mean, I agree. I think that it's totally unethical for somebody to come in and say, you have to do this before you can, expand your thing. And, oh, by the way, pay me to do it because I'm the only ones available to do it.
But in your example, there are 5 SEs. So if I'm the guy coming and I do your thing and I say, you have to do this, you now have, the person on the receiving end of that, even if there are only 5 that he can hire one of the other guys next.
Well, they're all working for the same group, though.
Right. So now again, if there's, the fact that they do this isn't the unethical or the problem part. The problem part is if there's collusion between the 5 to do it. If there are 5 independent people and And I go in my best judgment, I tell you, you know, Michael, you need to do X, Y, and Z, and then he can call me, or he can call you, he calls you, then I don't see anything wrong with it. Now, if you and I go, okay, we all tell him the same thing, so it doesn't matter who, and then we split whatever he pays us, there's, I think, where the problem. It's like the upsell with the oil change. If I come to you and say, you need to replace your power steering fluid, and you don't know, well, that's one thing, that sets up one set of recommendations. If I say, industry recommends you replace it at 60,000 miles, do you want to do it? Now you're relying on the industry recommendation and not mine.
Right.
So upselling is fine.
Right,
You know, I'm
exactly.
trying to sell you this service, but I'm doing it based on someone else's recommendation and not mine.
Yeah, I can,
I'm talking too much. What are you guys in front of me? As you can see, I'm kind of bashful and shy, and it's hard to get me out of my shell.
we'll keep working on it, though.
Okay.
I think they need to, you know, build credibility, and that's only done if you get someone from outside perspective. And that's what I found, like, that pretty much came to me, is that there needs to be credibility that's built.
I think the way that it's set up, it's really hard to say if it's ethical or unethical, because I think you're missing some information that would be pertinent to the whole.
Well, one thing that maybe the thing that caught me the most on reading this whole thing, and I tried to condense it down a little bit, was that the SEs, our honorable group, they sought the recommendation of the Tanzan National Ethics Office, and the SE's positions were, it still makes them uncomfortable. They feel like they may be doing something wrong. They're just not sure what it is. And to me, anytime you feel like you're doing something wrong, you probably are. At least in my case, it's always been that way. You know, if I think there's something wrong, especially with my own actions, then you know, if it's a gut feeling, then it's probably true.
The other thing that this case brings up, I think fairly illustratively, is it doesn't even have to be unethical. I mean, in my previous life in the government, it was the perception, if you were doing something that could be perceived as being improper, then you were also not supposed to do it. It may be fine, but if the perception of it would have been bad, then the rules were you shouldn't do it. So in this case, you know, had this been a governmental agency, you know, under, you know, federal ethics laws and stuff, the fact that this could be perceived as unethical or improper would then make it so. So even if it wasn't, they shouldn't be doing it.
I agree. And that's I probably got my feelings the same way because I'm former military also, and you know.
It's like, yeah, it's the old 60 Minutes test. Even if this is really okay, do you want to have to explain it to some Yahoo on 60 Minutes? If you're not willing to do that, then don't do it.
Never heard of 60 Minutes test.
You've never worked in the Pentagon. Everything is the 60 Minutes test in the Pentagon.
That's all I have. I think it's a good start for us to start discussing these types of things. I think it would be great if you all come back next month. We'll do this again. We'll do some more. Well, all right. We'll wait till January. Christmas break stuff.